In 2025, I moved my family from Fort Worth to New York City, and it was the best decision that I could have made for us. Now, I grew up in Chicago, so I know what it's like to grow up in a big city, run around the city, take public transportation. It was one of the greatest experiences in my life, having the opportunity to grow up in such an expansive and diverse city. But when I became a mother, I was living in Dallas, and I wanted to raise I think we all kind of have this idea when you live up north that the South is like the place to be. You want to live in the South, you want to raise your family in the South, you want to slow down. And so I kind of envisioned that for myself, that I would raise my son in the South. And we spent the first 2.5 years of his life in Dallas. And Dallas was not bad. Fortunately, we lived downtown, so we had access to public transportation. We were able to walk. There was a huge park, Clyde Warren Park, was near us. So there were things to do in Dallas, but the South and I just didn't mesh. It was things that I couldn't comprehend as someone who grew up in such an expansive city. So we left, and we spent some time. We were in LA. And then the pandemic happened. We moved to Chicago to be with family, but I couldn't stay there long for reasons that I'll go to in another video. But we went to Atlanta, and we were in Atlanta for 3 years. And I loved Atlanta. I really did. Atlanta is a beautiful place to raise a black family, especially. But it's just a beautiful place. The city is beautiful. There's enough things to do, but I still just did not feel connected. I don't know, it's just something about the South that I can't connect to. Maybe because we didn't spend a lot of time growing up going to the South. We would go to Mississippi occasionally to visit some distant cousins, but my grandparents, the only person who was like truly from the South was my maternal grandmother, and she left when she was 13. So there was no real connection for me to the South. But again, I thought this is where I need to raise my child. And I took a big contract in 2024. So we left Atlanta and moved to Fort Worth to be near my sister, because I was going to have to travel for work very often. And I thought I'm going to go to Fort Worth. I'm going to get a house, and maybe I'll slow down my life and get a husband and raise my son here. And this is where we're going to be. But there was something still kind of like pulling at me, where I knew the South wasn't the place for me. And Fort Worth, and I didn't like Fort Worth. Fort Worth is completely different from Dallas. It's a whole different vibe. Like, if you're in Dallas, you can kind of, it's more diverse. The people have more open mind. There's more things to do. But Fort Worth is like, when you think of a red place, Fort Worth is a red place. What you imagine Texas to be, that's Fort Worth. And we had a lot of run-ins with, that was really my first time experiencing racism, right? And people being like openly racist. I had never experienced that. It wasn't something that at least not knowingly experienced growing up in Chicago. And it wasn't really something that I noticed in Dallas either. I mean, maybe, but it just wasn't on my mind. But Fort Worth was the place where it was very much like, you don't look like us, we don't want you here. And one particular instance, there was a run-in with a parent and my son, my niece, and my nephew. They had come across some friends at the park. And my son and my nephew, they're big boys, right? Because I'm 5'11". I come from a tall family. And so they're big boys. And I often have to tell them, hey, when you're roughhousing with the girls, you have to be gentle, right? You can't, the way that you all wrestle with each other, you have to be a little more gentle. You have to kind of rein it in a little bit. And it's not like they're intentionally, they're heavy boys. And so there was an instance where they were playing roughhousing, but my niece was also involved in this, and she's a rough girl. So they were roughhousing with some friends, and one of the girls hit my nephew. My nephew hit her back. It was like in the arm or back or something, and I guess he was just a little too heavy-handed. And he said he apologized. He's like, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. And the girl went and told her dad. And instead of telling the dad, like, hey, we were playing and he may have been a little too rough, I don't know what she told her dad, but the dad, instead of saying, hey, go get your parents, he decided that he wanted to scream and yell and verbally attack my son, my niece, and my nephew. Now, my niece, she's my step niece. She's half black and half Laotian, I believe. Laotian. I want to make sure I'm saying it right. But so the kids come home. I'm at my sister's house. She lived about 2 blocks from us, and they're upset. My niece is bawling. I mean, she's crying. My son and my nephew are crying. Everyone's so upset, and so we're like, what's going on? What happened? What happened? So they're like, he was screaming at us and yelling at us, and absolutely not. Absolutely not. So I jump in my car. I said, get in the car, we're going to find them. Which house is it? They point us to the house. I knock on their door. And in that moment, I have all this adrenaline running through me, right? Because how dare you? But this is Texas. This is an open carry state. And I know in the back of my mind, these people could shoot me through the door. We know what happens, right? There's a whole Netflix documentary on it. And so I confront him, and I'm like, why wouldn't you tell them, hey, go get your parents? Why wouldn't you tell them, hey, go get your parents? So that was kind of my first instance of realizing that, oh, these people don't see us or our children as human beings. And then, it was just other little small things. The MAGA flyers and flags, and it was just a very uncomfortable environment. And the people were not very kind. They weren't welcoming. And so I made the decision. I started contemplating this decision in November of 24. That I was going to move to New York City because I want my son to have the experience that I had growing up in a place like Chicago. I don't want him to be afraid to take public transportation. I don't want him to be afraid to venture out and try things on his own. And I started to notice that as he got older, he was not as willing as I was at his age to go out and do things. Like, he didn't want to. My sister lived 2.5 blocks away, and he didn't feel comfortable walking the 2.5 blocks to her house. Whereas when I was 9 years old, I'm going outside, I'm ripping and running the streets. I want to go up and down the street. I want to go to the candy lady house. I want to go to the park. I don't need anybody to tell me and be with me, right? I had that hyper independence. And so I wanted my son to kind of have that experience and be comfortable with trying things on his own. And so I started having the conversation with him towards maybe over Christmas break. Christmas of 24, I talked to him about it, kind of wanted to gauge and see how he felt. And I knew that he loved being in Texas. He loved his friends. He had his teachers. He had kind of cultivated his own community in Texas, but I didn't want it. It didn't sit well with me. It wasn't something that I was comfortable with. It wasn't an environment that I wanted to raise my son in. And I started talking to some of the parents, trying to gauge kind of how, what their experience was like moving from the South or vice versa. And there was mixed reviews. Some people were what is expected. Like, why would you move to New York City? Why would you leave Texas to go to New York? And others were like, I wish I could do it. I wish that we had the opportunity to get out of this place, because this is not a good place. This is not a place that I want to raise my children, especially the families of color. They all kind of had that same sentiment of, I don't want to raise my child here. I don't want my child growing up with this small town mentality. I don't want this. And so I knew that we were making the right decision. And I started talking to my son about it every week. And we would have weekly check-ins, and I would ask him, how are you feeling? Let's go over some of your concerns, your fears, any questions you have. I pride myself on creating an environment where my son can come in and really just be raw and authentic and honest, whatever that looks like, about his feelings and emotions. And so we spent a lot of time talking about what this move was going to look like. And we don't have any family here. We have no family. Before we moved here, we only knew each other, me, him, and the cat. And so I talked to him about what that would look like, not being able to be around the corner from my sister and his cousins, and not seeing his friends that he's built this relationship with. And we did a lot of talking, and I worked with my therapist on how to properly communicate and how to process my feelings and his feelings, because in addition to my feelings, it's just me as a single mom. I had to understand how to process his feelings as well. And so I really started there, really just understanding that I don't want to be here. I want to put my son in a diverse environment, an expansive environment. I want to have that same experience that I had, and this is going to be hard, so let me work with a professional to make sure that I'm in the right space mentally, and then I can help my son be in the right space mentally. So that's how I kind of talked to my son about moving to New York City. I am going to go in more in detail, maybe in other videos, about how I found the school, how I decided on our neighborhood, how I found our apartment, which is a whole different story because I rented our apartment sight unseen. I didn't know what it looked like until we were off the plane, walking in the door with the keys. So I'll go into more detail about that. If you want to kind of have more intimate conversations, I do host free monthly rebuild. They're called the rebuild sessions, and some of them I talk about what it looks like to move across the country, what the cost is, kind of what the emotional toll is for that. And I also had a lot of anxiety with this move, and that was the first time that I had really experienced that. I've made cross-country moves before, but it was something about this move that just it weighed so heavy on me. It was causing me to lose sleep. I couldn't eat. I had to fly my brother in for a few days so that he could just be in my home with me, because I don't know if I felt like I was walking away from something, or I had so much certainty in Texas. Even though I was unhappy, I had certainty, right? I knew my cost of living expenses were well within my budget, and I was making a whole lot of money in Texas, and so I was very financially stable. Again, my sister was 2.5 blocks away, so we would spend a lot of time over there with her and her family. And I have a house, and I had my little Mercedes truck, and my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, she came and lived with us for 6 months, and so my dad's side of the family is in the Fort Worth area. Everything was just really comfortable, really set, and I knew that I was leaving that, and I was walking into completely unknown territory, and that gave me a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety, and it was starting to manifest as like a physical sickness. In addition to, I was also very sick in Texas. When we moved to Texas in December of 23, I started getting sick in January of 24, and still to this day I cannot tell you what was making me sick. We had the house checked for mold. My sister's house was checked for mold because we didn't move into our home until March. But I just started getting sick out of nowhere, and it was really bad. I had to have an inhaler. They had me on steroids, prednisone pills, and then I had to do prednisone shots, and it was starting to physically impact my body. In addition to like the extreme weight gain, I had so much inflammation in my body. I was struggling to breathe, and still to this day, no one could tell me what caused it. So on top of the physically being sick with this mysterious illness, I now had all of this anxiety thinking about the move, and it was becoming too much. It was too much. It was too much for me. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I wasn't working out anymore because I was so sick, exhausted, and my levels were off. I had to have all this blood work done, and my levels were off, and it was a really terrible experience. So I knew that it was time to leave, and I knew that I had to push through the anxiety, and I knew I had to push through the fear and not allow those to stop me from making this move. And I'm so happy that I did it, because it turned out to be the best decision ever. My son has really blossomed. He's grown so much in this year. He's much more open and willing to try things. He walks to the corner store by himself. He likes to go and grab food or snacks after school with his friends. And he's just grown, and I've grown, and I've really become more confident in my abilities to navigate and make big decisions. And yeah, I'm happy that we made this move. It was a really, really big, it was a big deal at the time. And looking back on it, there are things that I could have done differently to probably help ease my anxiety, but we're here, and I had to go for it, because if I didn't, we would probably still be in Fort Worth today.